Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Chestnut Paes.
And today we are talking about the Levels of Awareness model. And this is part 2 of a 2-part episode because last time we talked about the nature of these different levels of awareness that we have arranged around the Enneagram symbol itself. So today we're going to talk about what the 9 types look like at each of the 3 main levels that we humans in this lifetime will probably be working with.
Right, which are in our model level 1, level 2, and level 4. Level 4 comes after point 3, as we explained on the other podcast. And our goal today is to give you some, illustrations and examples of what happens on this path for each of the 9 types in a conversational way here between B and I.
So we're going to start, as we often do, with type 8. And so, Uranio, can you tell us a little bit about what type 8s are typically like when they're at level 1? And we do want to remind people that these are not fixed levels. In other words, it's not linear. You don't like stay at level 1 and then you go to level 2 and then you're only at level 2 and then you go to level 4. This is a more of a non-linear kind of process where we kind of go up and down the levels, although the point of using the Enneagram for personal growth is to shift your center of gravity to higher and higher levels of awareness as you do the inner work that you need to do to move forward on this path of development. But let's start with type 8 and tell us a little bit about how you see type 8s being at level 1 and what the work is that they need to do to move forward.
So most eights on that level are constantly aggressive, confrontational. They many times become bullies, and they don't see what they are doing or they deny it. Sometimes they don't see it because they have only this very strong going forward energy that takes any capacity for subtlety and for self-observation in details away from them. And they get naturally very bossy, but they don't see the impact on others that they have, even when it looks obvious for others. And therefore, they're usually clueless about the impact they have on others. And the energy is high and all the time, very high. It doesn't low down. Um, Another thing is that they are just a gut in action. It's like they are usually very instinctive and just pushing things forward because of what they smell in the air. It's like um, doing really before thinking of or feeling, doing because of sensations all the time, which is not necessarily bad. They can be, and this might be useful to know, all 9 types can be highly good performers when they are on level 1. They can be very functional at work, like in producing results, but for 8s, this comes many times at a cost for others, and of course, a big cost for self, unless the 8 is using a lot of energy as it's normal to not see that and to cope with everything. But sometimes that cost is high later on in life. So what do you think? What would you add, and would you say about the work to be done there?
Yes, I think at level 1, there's almost total denial of vulnerable feelings, of anything that the 8 might regard as weakness, and an overcompensation, a big overcompensation into expressing power and looking strong, and they can seem very what we might call classically egocentric and grandiose. And I think the work that needs to be done is to start to realize that that's not the whole story, that they are, they get defensive and what that's about for them, and what they're defending, and to start to have a little bit more introspection into how they come across and how they impact others. And sometimes I think that can be the catalyst for them moving to level 2 or wanting to do some inner work, is feeling some regret for how they impact others if they can start to get a sense of that.
Yeah, that's a good point because eights generally get really disappointed when they see that they have been unfair, because fairness is a very big value they hold. It's just that they don't see that they are being unfair. Now, on level 2, then the 8 is much more prone to being sensitive, to feeling more tired in a good way, because it's out of respect for the body, respect for emotions. The person starts to notice more the impact on others, and being more in the heart, and having some episodes of vulnerability, being able to go there and slow down a little bit and listen to others a bit more and be a bit more contained, which for an 8 sounds very important. And also, being less intense or excessive, even in doing less at times, and thinking more before doing and considering other people's points of views. And that is when the 8 can notice more what's happening and self-observe more and own things that usually emotional things that had been denied, and pain, suffering, and so on.
I think at level 2, the 8 benefits from doing inner child work, getting in touch more with their sensitivity and any hurts that they've experienced through their lives. Sometimes when 8s had a difficult early upbringing or childhood, that's part of what fuels their need to defend themselves. And to the extent they don't examine that, they can be stuck in kind of overpowering people or being excessively strong and not accessing enough their big hearts and their natural sense of sensitivity.
Right. And then on level 4B, I feel very inspired by students who are 8s that are on level 4. They are so naturally gentle. They are completely harmless. They are incapable of doing anything bad for anyone else. And I always sense that they are the best example of goodness in a human being. It's like it's natural goodness, inherent goodness that comes from the virtue of innocence. Um, there is then an emotional unwillingness to confront, and also innocence means non-reactivity. So the person is really soft and non-reactive. So the 8 responds, doesn't react. Um, and also on that level, 8s are a bit more contemplative, a little less concrete, a little bit more abstract, although that happens more on a later stage, even. But they surrender to something that is an external source of power instead of relying on their own.
And they're naturally more empathetic with others. At the earlier levels of awareness, 8s have trouble empathizing with others because, to the extent that they aren't in touch with their own heart, their own sensitivity, their own vulnerable feelings, they can't really empathize with others because they don't want to go there inside themselves. So at level 4, you find eights that are more humble, as you said, I think in a really beautiful way, very truthful, uh, but and direct, but coming from a really um, generous, empathetic place inside themselves that is much more combining sensitivity with power.
Right. And just one last comment is that as teachers and people who help individuals also, we usually sense that while in the beginning for a less evolved eight, we need to be very assertive and strong as practitioners. Later on, for an eight on level 4, we need to be the most sensitive possible.
Yes, we hear from eights how when they're growing, sometimes they feel bullied by others, or people get used to them being strong and tough and they don't recognize their sensitivity. And this is very hurtful to an eight who's actually doing real inner growth work. So it's very important to understand that we need to relate to eights differently at these different levels.
Right.
So let's move on to type 9. Can you say a little bit about what type 9 looks like at level 1 level of awareness and what the work is to be done?
Well, many nines look very aloof on that level, but a few nines may not look exactly aloof, but they will be involved in all possible daily operations, but in nothing that is really meaningful in terms of starting something new or making a difference. And they will be all the time energetically outside themselves, not in touch with themselves, like not even knowing what it means to be in touch with self, right? And this person in here has a very constant energy, very constant. And it can even be sort of a high energy from other people's perspectives. But the fact is, energy falls down immensely, massively when they get in touch with 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 what's for them, like their own priorities, their own agendas. And also when it comes to doing things differently and trying to innovate or to start a new project. Nines also tend to be either very routine oriented or very distracted, the aloof or the operational styles that I talked about. But in here, this is when it's very hard to say no or to go against and be very indirect when addressing problems with others. Yeah, what do you think, B? Do you see this the same way, or what would you add?
I would add that nines at this level can be very passive aggressive, uh, and especially since they tend to be asleep to themselves. There's a lot of resistance to being in touch with anger. They may not really know what they want or how to access what they want, but at the same time, don't want to be told what to do by others and are sensitive to feeling disrespected by others, but won't say anything about that. So there can be a lot of passive aggressive acting out. And it can be really hard if you're in relationship with a 9 at this level because it's hard to give them feedback that they'll take in. They may not own or see the passive aggressive behavior. And again, they're not in touch with the anger, and they may not recognize the passive aggression, and so stay kind of caught in it, and it can be hard to move out of that.
Right, and then they also might explode at times when they are on level 1. It's only that it takes years or decades to explode, usually. But then on level 2, the 9 starts to be more aware of things that they don't like, situations that they're not really happy with, or people, and they start noticing this more quickly, and little by little they start saying or doing something about it. It could be, creating better boundaries. It could be saying no, could be going against. And at times it's sort of fun, except for the person in relationship with that nine at that point. But nines at this point can become very oppositional, very negative. It's like the other side of how they live their lives up to then. But they start looking at themselves and sometimes feeling positively frustrated with having forgotten about themselves, and they get more body energy coming from discomfort. What would you add to this?
Yes, I think while at level one, nines may dissociate a lot. That's a defense mechanism. They may have a kind of incapacity for accessing their internal life, their desires, their feelings. At level two, they're more in touch with how they feel. They're more in touch with the fact of being frustrated that they don't know what they want and want to find out what that is, and want to assert themselves more and not abandon themselves or their own agenda as they may at level one. And so it's a discomfort place, but of course, it's good for nines to engage in discomfort, because that helps them move forward and learn to tolerate the feelings they may need to tolerate in order to get in touch with themselves at a deeper level and wake up more to what's going on inside.
Right. And then later on level four, the nine gets all energized. It's like the the best possible example of someone who's in touch with life force. The person feels and looks awakened, bright, and then the nine is always ready to just go do what is truly needed, like without wasting time with some routines, operations, or passive aggression, distractions. It's just go do or say or be whatever is right, and we call the virtue right action here. It's an emotional willingness to go do what the heart needs the most, and knowing that in the heart and engaging with spontaneous movement that will lead the nine to just be amazing, to make a whole big difference in the world. And many times the nine here becomes sort of revolutionary, someone very innovative and capable of changing realities in beautiful ways, and sometimes by being confrontational. But anyway, what happens here is that the nine is not afraid to shine very bright, even if it's seen as showing off. That's just who they are at that point.
Yes, I think when nines do the work to move from level two to level four, which again is our mainly our third level, even though it's called level four. It's about getting more in touch with their feelings, getting more in touch with what they want, getting more in touch with the fact of being overlooked or not heard in their lives, and realizing they need to take some responsibility to make themselves heard and to be proactive in expressing themselves. And at level four, it's interesting. I find that nines, you really see their individuality. I think at the lower levels, they blend in a lot. And so there's a kind of feeling you get like, oh, that's a nine, because there's this kind of easygoing sense of them. But they can be a little bit like looking like each other. Like you can get that flavor of someone who's a nine, who's, going with the flow. But at level 4, you really see who they really are. It's almost like they don't seem like they're blending in anymore. They seem like they are expressing what their likes and dislikes are. They're expressing their preferences, and even showing more of their strengths, and more of what makes them feel excited or good about themselves and about life. And so there's a kind of, I guess the way I always think of it is a kind of individuality. Like, you see who they are as an individual because they're taking the risk more often to step out, and they're allowing themselves to be in touch with anger as access to their own power, their own personal power. And so they're stepping out and being courageous in showing up in life a lot more.
Yeah. So let's move on to type 1. Type 1 on level 1 is usually very rigid, with self and others, but can be different proportions of that depending on the subtype. And also, there's a lot of anger contained in the inside and provoking a lot of body contractions and bad sensations. And usually the biggest one is irritability. And this person is sort of constantly looking at what is not correct, what is wrong, or what someone did that shouldn't have done, problems in general. And this person is very, very much self critical to a point of being really harsh on oneself. And then the desires, pleasure, impulses are not attended to. They are just left somewhere, and because of that, they get even more tense, and they follow this life script of just being perfect or searching for perfectionism, or trying to perfect others. It's all about perfection in a way. So bad temper is not very uncommon for ones at this point.
Yes, I think at level 1, ones can be very, very tense, but not recognizing how tense they are. Very, very angry, but really not recognizing both how angry they are and how much their anger is actually leaking out in their behavior, in their self criticism, in their criticism of others. And sometimes that anger can look like sarcasm and cynical humor, or it can look like um, being really exacting or requiring a lot of other people, or being very annoyed, and not realizing how much that shows in their behavior to others. And there can also be a, a kind of endless cycle of trying to do the right thing and follow the rules and make things a certain way, but then never feeling they're good enough. And so beating themselves up a bit more, whipping themselves to make it better, and it's never good enough. So it can be kind of a very negative cycle that results in a lot of internal anger that gets really repressed and held back, such that it leaks out, and that other people really feel that they can be hard to work with, hard to be in relationship with, because of that constant anger that's leaking out, that they don't see but that other people feel.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with you. And then on level 2, once start having moments of relaxation, start allowing themselves to do what we sometimes say, get worse and have some decadence, meaning that they will allow for some more pleasure, to relax and not to be so dutiful all the time or so perfect. Also, at this point, they start learning how to negotiate with the inner critic, and not allowing that to only be too harsh, and giving themselves some break, and more as people evolve within level 2, they can really deconstruct all that rigidity. And that means also working on body relaxation many times, spontaneity, expression, also, you know, opening up their hearts for searching for meaning in things, and be a little more strategic, less detail oriented, and having bigger aspirations in life. So all that starts happening, and there is an opening of the heart that happens after the one learns how to relax and have some more fun in life.
And I think at level 2, ones also are impacted a lot by some particular insights, that they usually have when they start to grow, some windows into what's actually going on at a deeper level. For instance, they start to see that the self-criticism that they engage in isn't necessarily a good thing that keeps them in order, that keeps them from experiencing a kind of chaos, which is often the fear behind the self-criticism. Like, I need to really keep myself in check. I need to make sure I'm doing the right thing, and otherwise bad things will happen. And so I think at level 2, they realize that the self-criticism is actually self-defeating. It actually makes things worse, not better. And actually that can be a hard move for ones to make. And also they start to see and feel more about their anger and more about what that's about and what they do with that. And they get more in touch with this sort of inner conflict between being angry and why they're angry, and the sense that anger is bad or that I need to control it, which again doesn't really help them. It just creates this inner conflict that both they suffer from, and makes them less available to be connected to other people and reach a higher level of their own true self. So I think here at level 2, they really do the work to understand why they're angry, to see that in action more, to allow themselves to lighten up or address deeper pains and the sources of their anger or frustration or resentment, so that they can become more lighter and have more compassion, especially for themselves but also for others, and kind of realize that perfection isn't really achievable or even desirable at this level of awareness, at the personality level. And they start to again lighten up and become, as you said, more flexible and easygoing.
Yeah, and then later on level 4, ones become the best example of people who are accepting of others and self. They are really light in such a good inner space, that they're just in peace in the inside, deeply relaxed, in compassion for everybody around, not judging. Judgmental mind goes away, very big time. And they are light also in the relationships, and they are humorous, they have more fun, but not in that sarcastic way that sometimes you see on ones. It's much lighter, and not many things become problems. They are not negative or oppositional, confrontational. They just flow with what's happening. They don't see problems everywhere.
I remember during my early Enneagram training, I saw a panel of ones once, and there were three men on this panel, and it was the funniest panel I'd ever seen. And I was really impressed with these guys because they had clearly done a lot of inner work, and they were so funny, so light, and self-deprecating, and not being hard on themselves, just having this very humorous view on life and on themselves. And so I think a good sense of humor is a really good sign of a one who has achieved a certain level of growth. Although ones can be funny at every level, I think they become even more funny at level 4, and become, more spontaneous, more truly happy, and also able to be okay with however they feel, and not needing to hold themselves back or control their impulses and feelings out of an ideal of kind of perfect way to behave. They're just much more free and accepting.
Let let's move on to the heart triad, starting with type 2. So on level 1, type 2 is constantly feeling this need to be liked and for people to sort of depend on them, indirectly, of course. They won't many times admit it. They don't ask for help. They are always, resistant when it's time for them to acknowledge what they need, and some hardship for them, if it will make them feel less proud of themselves. And also, choose at this point can be very manipulative, um, and always trying to repress their own needs in favor of bringing solutions for other people's needs. And pride there is operating all the time, but also the subtypes, of course, and we had podcasts about it. But mainly, what I want to say is that choose here can be very controlling without even knowing that they are controlling. Also, sometimes moody, especially when they don't feel understood or um, seen in their emotions. And some ones may have lots of tantrums at that point. What would you add or correct here, B?
I think the one key piece is this need to control others, to be central and important to others. And so it's kind of the idea of being codependent, almost addicted to other people in certain ways, needing them to need you, and not realizing the impact of your over focus on other people. And also, there's not much of a focus on the two's inner world other than the reactive emotions they have when they may not get what they want from others. But of course, it's like getting angry about unexpressed needs not being met, but of course, an inability to express those needs. I think there's a lot of repression of inconvenient emotions. And what I mean by that is emotions that might get in the way of connecting with others. But then, of course, the emotions that we don't allow leak out. So there can be leaking emotions in that wanting to control other people and getting upset when other people don't do what they want, don't do what we want them to do, or don't treat us the way we want to be treated. But of course, there's no directness, there's no communication, and often not a lot of awareness about our own feelings and our own needs. And so the controlling and the manipulation of others is a way we act out uh, our desire to get our needs met while being very unconscious about what they are, or the fact that the way we're going about getting needs met is very indirect and potentially intrusive on others. And but then there can be this sense of victimization or martyrhood around, like, well, no one gives me what I need, or no one, respects me or cares about me or understands me, when they don't realize that the way they're behaving towards others is based on this kind of too much attention on what others are doing, and not enough focus on being more aware of what's going on inside and a clarity and about communicating that to others in more honest ways.
Yeah, on level one, choose are concerned in different ways to have a good image, by, other people see them in a good light. And on level two, that changes. You know, sometimes choose start not feeling so good about being all the time nice or seductive, attractive, or powerful, influential. So what happens here is that choose start to respect a bit more those inconvenient emotions and being who they are and not just adapting to become what others want them to be. But that is a start yet. They have moments of that, and they, above all, observe their tendencies to adapt and try to be liked by becoming who they are not. Now, also on level two, maybe choose um, start paying more attention to the other things in life that are not relationships. It's like on level one, choose think that relationship is all there is, right? So on level two, they see that it's not necessarily, and they sometimes start feeling like they like being alone at times a bit more than before. They perhaps start accepting help or even asking for help, but it's still difficult. It's not yet territory of humility, level two, but there are some progress on that in here. And then they connect their own feelings because choose on level one are paying attention much more to other people's feelings, not to their own. And last, um, they just try to balance relationships in terms of giving and receiving a bit more. It's not so unbalanced, but because that becomes natural, not because they want to make things even. So, what do you think, B? Would you add anything here?
Yes, I think that at level two, twos start to look inside more and realize that they need to take responsibility for their feelings and their own insecurities instead of making other people responsible. It can feel like, well, you're not nice to me, and that's why I'm feeling bad, as opposed to, I'm expressing my needs by kind of trying to take care of you and then resenting you if you don't give me what I want that I haven't told you I want. So it's almost like twos, they get a lot more insight, especially into the pride, which can be very tricky and hard for twos to see. Definitely level one, twos tend to not see the pride, which is part of what drives their behaviors that other people can find frustrating. But at level two, they start to take more responsibility. They start to see, oh, like I'm focusing too much on this other person. I'm putting my own value on I'm determining my own value based on what other people see in me or say about me or how they treat me instead of valuing myself from the inside. And they start to want to be more authentic, and they start to see how they can be fake as a way to try to get other people to like them. And it's still hard to engage in conflict or to experience when other people don't like them or don't like what they do, but they can start to feel that tension, like, you know what, I think I need to be more in touch with myself. I need to be more honest. I need to make boundaries and say no more, even if that displeases other people or they don't approve of me. And I think they feel the difficulty of that, and which is a good thing. And they start to sort of tip the balance more in the direction of feeling their own feelings and stating their own needs more clearly.
Right. And then on level 4, it's amazing to see what happens with choose, as it is for all other types. And let me say, B, that it's not something that is so hard to see. We see this all the time with students of ours in our personal mastery program at retreats. So choose that get there become really beautifully humble, and they give up trying to control people and situations and what they feel, so that they don't feel humiliated or in the lower position that they wish to be. So they just stop controlling, but they do that gladly and feeling a big relief. It's not that they're sort of giving up, feeling disappointed, and that they give up controlling or get resentful. It's not that. It's just a big relief of not trying to be all powerful, superhuman. And then the two is pretty much in contact with vulnerability, pain, and humanity, which is being a limited being, right? And maybe brokenhearted as other people, and uh, just knowing that they don't have the solutions for everybody's problems, and knowing they have their own problems and that they can attend to, they usually get much calmer and much more silent, introspective, and also in touch with themselves, and feeling that they're not as capable of doing everything as they thought they were. So there is a lot less active energy for many Jews who are at that point.
Yes, and I think twos at level 4 feel a lot of relief at not having to be in everyone's business all the time, to not have to do for others. Again, it's hard to get there, but it's almost like there's a lot of freedom in focusing more on yourself and disconnecting from needing others to approve of you, or needing to affect so much what happens and be indispensable. And so there's a lot of humility, a lot of not needing to be the center of things, not needing to be so important, a lot of acceptance of just what's true in relationships and not needing it to be another way, and more comfort with being alone, with feeling humiliated, and just getting to know themselves at a very deep level and just being that, whatever that is.
Hi. If you're enjoying the depth of knowledge offered in this podcast, you might want to stay in touch with us. Beatrice and Uranio offer professional Enneagram training, personal development courses, self-guided online courses, and they even have a membership platform with over 100 hours of content. Head to cpenneagram.com/podcast to learn more.
Okay, so let's move on to type 3. And on level 1, type 3 is usually extremely active, having more of that go ahead masculine energy of performing, delivering, and fighting for goals in life, and not much space for their own emotions. And on this level, emotions are always around the corner, like not far away at all, and they keep coming, but they push them away. So they don't end up connecting to emotions. And this mechanism of not trusting emotions, not trusting feeling or being, and trusting only doing is uh, on full strength. And this person, the 3 on level 1, feels like it's impossible to stop. Really hard. It feels like dying for them. And they want to be central in everything that is happening. They have a very, very constant experience of shape shifting into what others want them to be, instead of asking what they want or who they really are. I mean, those are not questions that they ask at that level. And then emotions are much more embody it as needed. It's like they wear emotions according to what they need, or they think they need to be feeling, but they aren't really genuine in many times. Now, and one last thing here is that achievement, performance, being the first, being the champion, being the best around is what moves threes at this point.
Yes, at this level, level one, threes really don't know who they are, and they may think they know who they are, but they identify so much with the image of what they need to be, or different images of what they need to be. They may not even recognize that there is a real self that they're not in touch with. And as you said, they're really not in touch with their own emotions. And to the extent that they look emotional, it's a performance. It's taking on the emotions that fit the image. It's not a sense of authentic emotion that wells up from deep inside them. And there can, I think, even be a really total agreement with whatever the surrounding culture says they're supposed to be, and an inability to question that, because it's almost like they don't know any different. So they're really acting a part and doing what they're supposed to be doing, and looking to the outside completely about clues about who they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to behave and what their goals are. And they can be very driven and very hardworking, real workaholics, but with no sense of doing it for themselves or for a deeper sense of meaning or purpose. It's just really all to serve the goal of achieving whatever they need to achieve, or be whatever they need to be, based on this sort of outer sense of um, what what others view as successful.
Right. And then when they reach level two, threes engage a bit more with emotions, at least at times. They still feel motivated by doing and getting there, but not as much as before. And they start seeing importance in other things in life. They perhaps start missing seeing their kids growing or their relationships. They remember friends from the past that they went away from because of working too much, or they start feeling concerned with their health, or not really wanting to be as workaholic as before. And again, they invite more emotions in and stay with those. But it's not that that happens all the time. It's more like all that starts happening and they get split in the inside, as we explained on the first podcast about the levels of awareness. Now, shape shifting still occurs, but perhaps the three starts to be a bit more aware of that happening, if not at the moment, a little later. And then they start questioning if this is what they really want, if this is who they are. And, there are moments that threes even want to slow down pace and to try to just contemplate a bit more what's happening. And definitely one of the big gains here is being able to listen to others a bit more.
Yes, I think at level two, type threes start to recognize that there's a big difference between who they really are and the images or the performances that they take on. And they start to question that. Now, again, usually at first, not that deeply, because there's still a sense of needing to rely on this ability to shapeshift, to become what others want, to be successful in the eyes of the outer society. And but there is a dawning awareness. More feelings start bubbling up, and there can even be a sense of confusion, like, wait a minute, who am I really? They start to question what they thought they knew about themselves and about the way to be in the world. And it's a good sign when these emotions start bubbling up, even if they're painful or confusing or disorienting. They often also start to recognize that they're missing out on some things in their life. It might be, I'm not spending as much time with my kids as I'd like to, or I'm not having quality time with friends in the way that I wish I was, and why not? And they start to recognize the significance of how hard it is for them to slow down and slow their pace. And they start to question that. And again, all these are really good things. And they may also start to do more deeper reflection, because remember, level 2 is when we start to self observe more, and self observing leads to being able to self reflect at a deeper level, which is what creates more self understanding. And often threes will think, well, wait a minute, I don't even really like what I'm doing in my career. And I only really did this because my family valued this profession, and kind of gave me the message that I needed to do this in life to be seen as successful or valuable. So they start to question all those things. And as they start to question that, they start to get more in touch with their real emotions and what's really important to them. And that split is really good. And they gradually start to gravitate more toward giving more energy and inner support to who they really are, even if that's uncomfortable, which it really often is for threes, because they have to give up on a lot of big rewards that they were really good at, even at level 1. This is the problem with threes at level 1, is they're often very successful and very functional in the world. And that's hard to give up when you feel that inner split at level 2, and need to start maybe moving away from ways of being that made you successful and made you feel safe in the world.
Now, on level 4, type 3 gets completely different from the beginning, because on level 4, the person is always sort of upside down when we consider level 1. It's the opposite. So the 3 here is slow. The pace is really slow and almost constantly slow, much less active, and much more feminine and not masculine, completely emotional, and impacting other people by who they are and not by what they do, and by how much they feel and how bright their hearts shine, and also how truthful they are, meaning that they don't shapeshift and they are only who they are, which has to do with the virtue of veracity. Now, it's also amazing to see how these threes inspire others to be who they are. I mean, not be fake and not do politics or not have side talks or small talks about other people. And they inspire truthfulness. Um, and in a way, they don't wish to be central. They are just observing things happening with patience. They are very patient in there. And again, for you listening to this podcast, you can totally believe that threes can be that. And we could perhaps introduce you several threes that we know who are there already.
Yes, at level 4, it's really lovely to see how emotional threes can be, but in a way that they're very comfortable with. That it's almost like a kind of calm sense of being emotional. And as emotion just coming forth in terms of what really makes them feel sad or happy or touched. And they really take life as it comes. They know who they are and what's important to them. And they're very relaxed in terms of doing or achieving, and it's much more about what's meaningful to them. And there's no sense of urgency about proving anything or being anything. It's a kind of gentleness and sensitivity that they live more from, and they really feel very heartful in a very beautiful way. So let's talk about type 4. and how type fours look at these three different levels. And so, what can you tell us about type fours at level one?
On level one, fours stay all the time in the inside, in their inner world, and just contemplating the feelings and idealizing or being nostalgic, meaning that they don't really like what they see when they stick to what's present right now, right here. And they value more the past or the future by devaluing the present. Also, it's all about comparison. Fours are comparing themselves to others whenever they feel like they are missing something. They try to find someone they think has that. And it may very well be just a feeling or a sense of being joyful at the moment. So there is a constant feeling of something missing really constant in here, and also a disappointment to whatever is present. Very hard to focus on what's in there. Fours tend to be very much self-absorbed in that point. And also, it's those subtype behaviors that are so unique and different among different type 4 people are really strong in there and operating all the time. But also as hard types, they are very much concerned with image approval and how others see them. But on the other hand, also really concerned with being authentic, expressing themselves, and above all, they define themselves by what they feel. They rely almost only on emotions in here.
Yes, and I think there can be a very deep sense that they don't question that there's something wrong with them or that they lack worth or they're inadequate in some ways. And a lot of what they do is based on that deep feeling of inadequacy. And that really drives them. And they tend to look at what's missing and not what's present to just a really big degree. And as you say, the subtypes are very important with type 4. They're so different. So you have the self-preservation for really just working very hard, uh, being hard on themselves, not sharing their internal process, their emotions with others, and to the extent that they don't, not being supported in the world, and really toughing it out and being long suffering, and masochistic at times without realizing it. And then with the social 4, it's a lot about over identification with big feelings and really getting lost in this over attachment uh, to especially sad or melancholy emotions and shame. And then for the one-to-one or the sexual 4, they can be very angry, really externalizing their view of what's wrong. So, people aren't giving me what I need. People aren't seeing me and the ways I'm special. People aren't understanding me. And so a lot of getting really lost in a lot of expressions of anger and dissatisfaction and having a hard time going beyond that.
Right. So on level 2, fours start changing for better. And that is seen when they value a bit more some of the moments of that are here and now, people who are in their lives right now, situations that exist and not only the idealized situations. They start feeling pleased by a few things in life, but it's not like feeling enthusiastic about them, because that's also not being present. It's more like being okay, being calm and okay with whatever is present. Again, that starts happening. It's not happening all the time at all, but it starts being an experience that is new and helps the four get more split positively split in the inside. The person gets less emotional, a bit more balanced, and looks outside a bit more and see what's happening out there in the world, in reality, and not only using the filter of my heart here inside me. So at this point, fours get a bit more disciplined, present to what's happening right now, not as much taken by emotions, and they become more constant in general. Uh, One last thing, B, is that they also balance this attention to self and others, because force can be self-referencing a lot, and at that point they start looking at others a bit more.
Yes, I think at level 2, as type 4s really self-observe, they become more objective about what's happening inside themselves. They start to question this idea that there's something wrong with them. They start to recognize the way that they can be a bit too carried away or too attached to specific emotional states, and not take in, like, as you say, what's really happening. And so, in a way, in a good way, they start to balance their own inner sense of things, and they can be excessively introspective and be a little bit lost in their own internal reality, and they start to balance that out with the reality from the outside and taking in more other people's feedback and listening more to how other people actually experience them, which balances out this focus on this certain way of seeing things. They recognize that they may be striving for ideals and and comparing themselves excessively to others and the impact of that on them, and the way that doesn't really work to do anything productive for themselves except make themselves feel bad and fuel this sense of inadequacy. And they can start to recognize how they can even amp up their own emotions as a defense. They can sort of take refuge in melancholy or a kind of depression as a way of not really moving forward in their life, and they take steps to change that. And of course, this is really different for the three fours because the three fours are so different, the three subtypes. So we always need to remember that as well, that this will look different for them, for each of them, especially in terms of how they start to shift their focus at level 2.
And on level 4, type 4 gets access to equanimity as a virtue, and that helps them experience a deep sense of peace and calmness and being at one with all there is and other people, meaning that they don't feel inferior or superior. Also, they just are there, and they are way less emotional at that point. They are just balanced. It's such an inspiring thing to see someone very balanced, at peace, and in total equilibrium between head, heart, and gut, and also in sync with the earth and nature and others, not staying only in the inside, not intensifying emotions only, so that allows for us not to stick all the time to feeling pain and suffering. At the same time, they may get in touch with some deeper kinds of pain that have nothing to do with drama. And in a way, in here, intensity goes away and gives space to just a more balanced and, above all, a stable sense of being, and fours are not moody at all in here.
And at level 4, fours get in touch with who they really are and their own essential value. So they stop looking outside themselves and seeing something out there that's better than what they are, and they start owning their true qualities. And I think because of that, they often get a beautiful sense of confidence. And sometimes when fours can, react to a sense of inferiority by needing to be superior, um, that eases up too. There's a way that when you know who you really are in a very grounded way, when you're owning your individual strengths as you don't need to be superior or inferior, and you don't need to look outside yourself and see what you aren't or what someone else has that you aren't, or for ideals that you haven't yet lived up to. You see and own the beauty and power of who you are and where you are and what you're doing, and you move from there. And so I think there's a lovely kind of quiet confidence that healthy fours get, where they don't need to amp up their emotions, and they don't need to either collapse into a sense of inferiority or overwork to prove their worth. They just are. And there's a lot of self acceptance, which I think feels like relief in many ways for fours at this level.
So moving on to 5. On level 1, 5s are isolated, sort of cold, disconnected, contracted, and sometimes aloof, distracted, but mainly they disconnect from people, from relationships, from life at times. And they save energy and plan ahead for everything, how much they will dedicate themselves to each thing, in a way that they are not really flowing with life. So flow is something that is very hard for a 5 at that point. So everything needs to be structured by them, and planned ahead. So there is a lot of withdrawing here, withdrawing also from conflicts, from intense feelings or discussions. And 5s in here also try to live a life without many needs, a life of simplicity, self-sufficiency, just so that they don't depend on others and they keep feeling independent. And also, they feel overwhelmed very easily by other people's requests and demands. What else would you say, B?
I would say at level one, fives find ways to stay safe through being disconnected and living life in certain ways. And they almost rationalize what they do to the point where at level one, fives can kind of feel okay. Like, I've got things set up. I've got my mental concepts that rationalize my way of living. I'm self-sufficient. I don't need others. Often they're not really in touch with that desire for connection or any sense of the value of being connected to emotions. And so they set up their lives in a way where they feel safe, where they don't need to rely too much on other people. Maybe they minimize their needs, and they regulate things in such a way to not feel vulnerable or not feel a kind of fearfulness they can feel if they are sort of confronted more with needing things from others, or having to deal with others' emotions. It's like they get really good at defending against any kind of need or access to that kind of experience. And so, in a way, fives can get stuck a little bit because they can rationalize the way they live as being, the right way to do it, and something that feels safe, and therefore why would you challenge that? So they can be a bit more isolated, as you said, and disconnected and aloof and even arrogant in their way of living, so that they don't question that, and they just stay comfortable through being more mental and more connected to knowledge and less connected to people.
And also on level 1, 5s disconnect from their bodies. They are not in touch with their bodies, and they sometimes take the body to be just a support for the head, if so.
Mhm.
And then on level 2, all that starts to change, because fives start touching base with the body, with the heart, with relationships. And that usually comes with a hard but important thing here at this level, which is the five feeling a void in the heart. Like a void created by all those years left in isolation, disconnection, and that pattern of not giving much, not receiving much, just controlling life in terms of what they would allow themselves to live. So they start becoming more emotional, a little less mental, a bit more spontaneous, and not trusting the logical mind only. Realizing that at times the logical mind doesn't do much for a few things in life. Perhaps expressing more emotions and trying to get closer to people they like, or saying what they need, and not running away as much. Now, again, on level 2, it's not that we are changed at all. All those things start to happen. We are just opening up the doors for something different than the basic personality. And then what happens for fives here is that they also feel very fearful of feelings, because that is a bit of what's behind the problem, and they get more directly in touch with this thing that's underneath the rest of the reactions. What else would you say, B?
Yes, I would say fives at level 2, it's like they start to question some of the mental concepts that they've had about how they live their life. They start to realize there's more to life, and they start to, in some ways, recognize that it doesn't really make sense to be so disconnected, to be so isolated. And they start to get in touch with more of a longing for being closer to other people. And they start to begin to tolerate, I think, in a really positive way, the feeling of awkwardness when they allow themselves to move out of their comfort zone, to open up a little bit more with people, to open up to more of their own emotions, to see a little bit of what they're missing when they stay too comfortable behind boundaries, or living their lives in the ways that they've decided to live them through their sort of intellectual approach to life. And they start to, I think, experience some of the good things that come with being more open and more connected with people. And so that starts to motivate them more to challenge more some of the ways that they've implemented to stay safe and avoid too much depletion. So they start to question even that mental model that I think they're really locked into at level 1, which is I need to regulate my energy and I need to avoid things that take too much energy for me. And they start to question that scarcity idea that there's only so much energy. And if I do this, it will deplete me. They start to realize that maybe there's something faulty in that intellectual view of life, that you only have so much energy. And they start to realize that they don't believe in abundance, and that that belief is really driving the show, and that if they shift the way they see things, that things can actually change for them in a positive way.
Yeah, and then on level 4, in touch with the virtue of non attachment, fives dare to not control life as much, and not to control themselves as much. So, what that means in practice is that fives just flow with what happens. They don't plan ahead, they don't try to put limits to other people. They allow people to come in and come out. And they also just go with what other people suggest them to do. And they say yes, yes, yes. Way less word no, I can't, no, I won't. And even if they don't say that as much, they do that a bit, like putting people on a waiting list or on the backlog of work. So they don't do that. They just flow with things. And by not controlling, they feel an incomparable level of energy. It's way higher. And also it's very interesting to experience what happens with fives there, because they feel really the most connected to feelings, to themselves, and to everybody around them, always available, always abundant. It's very different from before, and it feels energizing the more they do that, invigorating. So there isn't much waste of energy here. It's just connecting to the flow of energy in between us, and that gets bigger and bigger when we relate. Also, there is this capacity to be with others, paying attention to them, and being more um, ready to serve, but really, really there for the other with the heart. What else, B?
Yeah, I would say type fives at level 4 are very available and generous, especially with their time and energy and attention, which at level 1 they were really restrictive around and guarded in a almost a little bit of there's almost a little bit of a hostility in that guardedness, like don't ask me for more than I want to give you. Whereas at level 4, there's more of a flow, and they're more open to what flows between them and other people and what they can be available to, and also more value of that feeling of being connected, and more showing up spontaneously without knowing what's going to happen, without anticipating what might happen between people, but being fully there and present for whatever life brings in a way that's very courageous for fives, given sort of the mental model they start from, to let go of that and let go of boundaries and be more open and see their energy as not limited, is a really lovely thing. And they become really present in relationship, and really lighthearted and enthusiastic about connecting with others.
Moving on to type 6B. On level 1, sixes have that constant anxiety, tension that sometimes isn't unconscious, but it's always there. Also, they are always thinking of what's going to happen, trying to map out risks. So they are really prone to seeing problems ahead, and even training the worst case scenario thinking. Also, they map out risks for others, not only for them. They try to be very cautious or to challenge risks, but always looking at them. They avoid stepping into their own authorities, and they have problems with authority figures. Um, and, it's a little bit like postponing success in life, self boycotting, and having a lot of self doubt and doubting others. So that's the typical definition of sixes as we read about this personality type. But later on, it gets better if the person does inner work. But what would you add to this level 1 for type 6B?
Yes, I would say a lot of negativity. And again, that's the way, especially other people experience them. A lot of focus on what's going to go wrong and an inability to see what could go right, driven a lot by fear, and they may not see it as fear or experience it as fear or call it fear, but acting out their fear in many different ways, whether it's by mistrusting people or going against authority or pointing out problems all the time, or worrying a lot, or sabotaging their own success and forward movement in life, having a really difficult time with decisions, getting kind of stuck in their own life and their own ability to manifest their strengths and talents in the world. Um, just being very much in a kind of uh, potentially negative loop by the focus of seeing things negatively and projecting things out in the world that they don't see as projections.
Yes. Now, on level 2, sixes start working on anxiety. They see how important is it for them to invest in things that relax them. Also, they start noticing that many of the people and situations that they don't trust may have started inside their heads, meaning that they are projecting the fear they have in the inside onto the external world. They start to see that. It's not that they see that all the time. Level 2 for all of us is where self-observation becomes more possible if the person then dedicates energy and good techniques for that. Now, sixes in here start to feel a bit stronger and grounded in the body, and therefore they go for things that prior they were procrastinating. Previously they were procrastinating. Now they sometimes go into action without excessive planning or rehearsing, and without the need to be sure about the results. So it's a lot of change already on level 2. What else would you add, B?
Yes, I would say at level 2, sixes start to see their fear more. They start to call it fear and not just being prepared or being good problem solvers or deciding to do things differently or being ambivalent. They really start to understand what their fear is about and begin to have the ability to notice it and move forward in life despite it. So it's not about getting rid of fear for sixes, obviously, but it is about self-observing a lot more, what the fear is, what it's about, what it motivates you to do, and to be able to interrupt some of those processes and shift out of a kind of mental loop that is driven by fear. Being able to work against some of the habits that come from fear. And again, this differs greatly for the three subtypes of six. Like fours, the three type six subtypes are quite different from each other, even opposites in some ways. So for the self preservation six, it's becoming much more aware of not only how the fear drives them, because self-pres sixes are more aware of fear, but how they get really friendly and look very people pleasing as a reaction to fear, and how that's kind of fake and how it's not reflective of what's on the inside, and how it stops them from being more authentic or being more confident. And so they start to understand the inner split between that part of themselves that's driven by fear and the part of them that's capable of being more courageous and more strong and more confident. Now, with the social six, it's recognizing how they project their authority onto outside authorities so much and get stuck in being uber responsible, and have a hard time relaxing or owning their own authority or finding ways to consult their feelings and their instinctual impulses and not just their mental concepts, and their ability to learn new things. And then for the sexual six, I think level 2 is important because they start to get in touch with fear. Sexual sixes tend to, especially at level 1, not be in touch with fear at all, but move move in aggressive or assertive ways when they do feel afraid, sometimes in ways that create problems for themselves and threaten other people. So at level 2, it's about recognizing the ways they cope with fear, and the 3 subtypes do it in distinct ways, and starting to recognize the problematic nature of that and the way it holds them back, and the ways they need to get more in touch with both fear and the coping strategies they employ to deal with fear, and how both of those can be things that aren't so good for them, and start to move more into a whole different mode. It's like sort of you can't sort of stay in that fear mode and do it differently, but sort of being able to go into the heart or into the body or into different ways of seeing things so that they can own their strength and confidence more, and feel the fear but move forward into life anyway in new ways.
Right. Then on level 4, sixes transpire true courage. So they go ahead despite fear, because courage is not the absence of fear, it's the decision to go ahead regardless. And also, they experience later a much less fearful space because they have put themselves into action faster. So when sixes go into action without planning too much, without postponing or procrastinating stuff, they feel more courageous. But courage is not any ordinary experience, and none of the level 4 experiences are ordinary. So it comes with things like a big energy in the body, an opening of the heart, a sense of reaching out to all the external field of energy and to others, and feeling not only grateful for everything but also hopeful, and with a lot of positivity. Many times it shows up with a lot of relaxation, but at the same time, a felt sense that I'm strong and I'll be fine and everything is fine. So this is having the heart open and going ahead with that open heart. This is a little bit of what happens on level 4, 4 type 6. Last, they become way more comfortable in their own authority. They go do what they're being called to do without further delays, without hesitation, and they cease to have problems with other figures of authority.
Yes, I think what you said is very complete there. It's just really all about stepping into their own power, confidence, strength, courage, such that fear isn't as operative in directing the things they do. So it may still be there, but it doesn't stop them. It doesn't control their lives. It isn't the focal point of the way they show up in the world. They actually the going against fear in a very conscious way, and becoming and owning the capacity to be calm in the face of fear, to be really productive and even heroic in the face of fear, comes more into the forefront.
Yes, so moving on to our last type, type 7. Sevens on level 1 are really everywhere. They scatter their energy in way too many different things. They are always opening doors and windows to have more options and stick with different projects at the same time. And they try to keep all doors open. Now, at the same time, they are really attached to having pleasure or being happy in there, to be positive above all. And there is a lot of planning of life so that I don't experience the negatives and I stick only with the positives. And I can always find a way out of pain. in here if I'm a 7 on this first level. And rationalization is big. It's like I don't allow myself to get in touch with pain or suffering because I rationalize all of that. So it's a lot about being energetic, being positive, being happy all the time, excited, and also feeling that life needs to be like that, rationalizing anything to say that this is the way to live life.
Yes, I think sevens at level 1 are their attention is very scattered. They have an inability to focus, even though they might be quite active and might do a lot of things. There's not an intentional focus on what they're doing in a conscious way, and there's a lot of acting from fear of being trapped in an unpleasant experience without realizing that they're acting from that fear. So a lot of distracting themselves, a lot of moving from one thing to another, a lot of looking for opportunities to have pleasant experiences, a lot of avoidance of what threatens not to feel so positive or what can feel scary or daunting or uncomfortable, with again without realizing it's a big blind spot at this point that they're motivated by this any kind of fear of pain or suffering or unpleasantness, or and again, it's always a fear of being trapped in it forever. So that drives them a lot, but there's no awareness of it. So it just feels like on the conscious level, I'm just looking for fun things to do. I'm just wanting to have meaningful, interesting experiences. I'm just focusing on what's positive or what is bringing some sort of good into the world, without recognizing the underlying motivation. And so this can make them sometimes unreliable. It can make them avoidant in ways that really impact other people, but they don't see. And it can make them very self centered, like needing to have a lot of control over their own experience and maybe silently rebelling against others, charming and disarming intellectual charm to allow them to direct the course of their own experience so that they can avoid what they might want to avoid, often in ways that are a little bit under the surface and not so upfront with other people.
And then on level 2, sevens start feeling bothered with things like not finishing up projects, not going to the end when they cease to have pleasure with what they are doing, and therefore losing opportunities and not accomplishing things, and having they even start feeling the regret that deep inside they do feel about that. They start remembering childhood episodes that were not as happy as they thought they were, and even looking at things that are happening right now in their lives, not only with that positive view, the pink lenses, and the colorful way of seeing everything happening. So it's more of a shock of reality that happens with sevens slowly here on level 2. They get more in touch with things as they are and not as they idealize them. Also, in here, sevens slow down a bit. They get more in touch with themselves. They stay a little more in solitude, perhaps, without just getting distracted, and being more in touch with their hearts and with the body, and not only with ideas and ideas. And they commit to putting ideas into action and saying no to several ideas. Now, all that comes with a bigger capacity for empathy, for really listening to other people and being there with them, even if at times they might be boring, or if they might be a bit negative. They just stay with them.
I think at level 2, 7s start self-observing more, and they start seeing the downside of all that frenetic activity. They start noticing how they distract themselves and what the costs are of that. They start recognizing that they're not being fully present to their lives and that they're sort of running away from certain experiences, that they're not just moving towards something positive, but they're actually moving away of what might be scary or uncomfortable. And so I think at level 2, 7s start to get more calm, more present. They start to balance out maybe the fast pace with more ability to stabilize their focus uh, and be more present to people, be more present in relationships. And they start to notice how they rationalize. And that's the big defense mechanism of type 7, whatever they may want to do. And that's their way of staying free. And how much they avoid any limitation of any kind. And again, a lot of the awareness of this is big in itself, even if they're not yet fully capable of moderating these tendencies. Seeing them is really big for 7s. A 7 knowing the blind spot of not wanting to be in touch with any kind of pain or fear or discomfort is big in and of itself. So they start to become more balanced and more serious and more present and more grounded as they realize these things, and they start to get more in touch with their emotions in a really positive way. They start to allow themselves to feel pain and start to recognize that just because they let it in doesn't mean that it will be with them forever or it will overwhelm them.
Right. And then on level 4, 7s are completely committed to going to the end of this one thing that really matters, or two perhaps, and saying no to other things that were, you know, perhaps nice ideas, but not really priorities. And 7s stay really tuned into what's happening right now, as in what life is bringing me to live. And they say yes to that, and they stick with it as long as it takes, not as a mental strategy of saying, oh, I'll do that for this much time. It's like doing what is coming for me to do. Also, they they don't spend energy in things that are not relevant, in distractions, in mental stimulation, or whatever is not something I would like to spend energy at. And also, they become calmer, centered, grounded, silent, focused. A lot of concentration actually can be seen on 7s at that point, and they don't run away from problems, pain, or suffering if they are happening. And they know that they will go away eventually, but they stay with them as long as needed. And then they also don't get too excited with things that are nice happening later. They just leave life more in balance. What would you add, B?
Yeah, again, I think that's very complete. I would say 7s at level 4 become really a joy to be around because they're really present with you. They aren't on any level needing to move away from the experience of what's happening now in the present moment. They're able to focus and be in the moment, recognizing that there's a richness in whatever's happening now, even if it's painful or uncomfortable. And so they become more available to others. They become more available to themselves and less scattered, more focused, more balanced and grounded. And they're still very positive and light, and in some ways, truly joyful instead of just happy in a more superficial way. It's like they realize that by accessing pain fully and allowing themselves to feel their emotions through to the end, that's what really allows them also to enter into joy and happiness in a much fuller, more satisfying way. It's time for our top 5.
What is our top 5 today, B?
Our top 5 is the most shy types. The 5 most shy.
Oh.
So, what is your number 5?
I have a draw as my number 5. I couldn't make up my mind about it. And it's between 7 and 2. So before I say why, I want to say something more general. Having worked like you with thousands and thousands of people, I can definitely say that all 9 types can be shy or not, without exception. And there is no such a thing like a type whose people are always shy or never shy. And even if you get the subtypes, that can vary, although it varies a little less, or significantly less. In my view, I don't have the actual numbers or statistics. It's not that, but in my view, 7s and 2s are not very shy, but you still find several of them who are shy. And these 2 types have this interesting feature of thinking themselves that they are shy, but almost at times, not always, but nobody else agreeing with them that they are shy, right? And I've seen this several times with both 7s and 2s. And I also think that it's tricky, although I really liked thinking of this top 5 about the most shy. I think it's tricky because, the image of someone who's shy might be deceiving. Like sometimes it's not really being shy, it's being insecure or being a bit more of an introspective or other things that are not necessarily being shy per se. But yeah, I have this draw on number 5. What about you?
I also had a draw on number 5. I put self-preservation 2 and self-preservation 4. And I think there are cases with both these types when they're not shy. I think definitely they cannot be shy. But I also think that oftentimes they can be. I think the self-preservation too, especially I would say maybe in both cases, if they have social second, strangely enough, because I think the sexual subtype in there can actually make someone sort of more energetic and out there. But the self-preservation too, I often hear them say, like when I'm doing typing interviews, that they hang back and they sort of get a lay of the land and they don't enter in until they feel safe. And so they can be shy, especially at first. And I see self-preservation fours often not really sharing what's going on inside, feeling like it's not really okay to share too much of themselves too quickly.
Yeah, makes sense. So my number 4, I don't know if it will surprise you or not, but my number 4 is type 5. I believe that there is a big misconception that people have as if 5s are shy. And as a 5 myself, I don't feel like I'm shy. And talking to many 5s, most of them don't feel it either. For 5s, it's not about being shy, that behavior of needing privacy or staying alone. It doesn't feel like shyness at all. It feels like more like an independence, self-sufficiency, and feeling well when alone, and a lack of interest in being with others. And many fives are sort of okay, like when they need to go do something in the world. It's just that it bothers her. It's not really being shy. And when they go, they don't look shy per se. Again, I think it's a little bit like the definition of what being shy means. But actually, I was in a doubt between the order of my number 4, 3, and 2. And I decided to have type 5, as my fourth, just to state this point, which for me is very important. What is your fourth?
Yes, you're making me think that we maybe should have defined shy first. But my fourth is six. And I would say maybe more self preservation six and social six. Although I have friends who are sexual sixes who, although they can be very strong in their presence, also feel shy, like they need to hang back a bit before they fully trust that it's okay to show who they are. So I put six second because I sometimes hear also from sixes saying that they question, they doubt, and that sometimes results in shyness.
Yeah, makes sense.
And what's your number three?
It's 6, type 6. I basically agree with you. And I think when some 6 is more of an introvert, I do see more of the shy aspect than I see for 5s. And sometimes you can say it's a bit like insecurity, lack of self confidence. But I think that there are many 6s who are genuinely shy. More, as you said, a bit more for self pres. I think that more than for socials and more than for sexuals, not only sexuals, in my view. But I do think that there are several 6s who are shy. It would be good to explore the reasons behind the shyness. Sometimes it's not the cause; it's more of a consequence of feeling insecure. But yeah, 6s are my third. What about you?
My third was sexual three, actually. And I think that, again, this can go both ways. And I think, it's hard to generalize, of course, always. But I do find some sexual threes being shy about really putting themselves out there, being on stage, saying who they are. I've worked with sexual threes in companies where they had great one-to-one relationships, but it was hard for them as leaders to get out in front. I've also known sexual threes as friends who, when it comes to certain things, especially about sharing about themselves, I think when they're, say, doing a business task or at work, they can easily be or appear not shy. But I think when it comes to sharing who they are, they can be very shy.
Right. Yeah, I take your point. I didn't include 3s on my top 5, and I think one of the differences is that I got only type and you went to the subtype level. But I agree with you that some or many sexual 3s tend to be shyer. Now, my number 2 is 4. I think that many 4s are shy, but that really depends on subtype, doesn't it? um, Social 4s are usually shy, and while sexual 4s are not as much. And as you said, self-pressed 4s are sort of shy sometimes. I think it depends a bit on which instinct comes second. If it's sexual, then chances are that they are not as shy, in my view. But I think that as a percentage, you see many 4s who are shy. I think that more than you see 6s or 5s. What about you?
Uh, yeah, I definitely take your point. I only had fours and a tie for my fifth position, but I hear what you're saying. For me, for my two position, I put nine. I think often nines. are shy because they don't always put themselves out there. They don't always say what they think. They can blend in more and feel a little bit safer, not being out in front, saying, "This is who I am." Sometimes they aren't sure who they are yet. So I put 9 at position 2.
Yeah, and my first is 9. So I agree with you. And I do think that statistically, there are more 9s that are shy than 6s or 4s. So it's my number 1. And I think that comes from this tendency we see for 9s of not playing big, not showing off, not standing above, and I think that trying to be less sometimes leads them to be shy, although definitely there are 9s who are not shy. What is your first? I think I know.
Yes, my first is 5. And while, of course, you're more of an expert on 5 than I am, I do know 5s that are quite shy and that report being shy. But I do think you made some important points about sometimes we believe 5s are being shy when it's not really about being shy. It's about being self sufficient or something else. So I think it may be important to define our terms when we're, assigning traits to different types. But from what I've heard and seen in my travels, I find that 5s can tend to be very shy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think, it would be a good idea some other time to define what it is to be shy. Maybe I have wrong assumptions about it. Like one of the assumptions I have is that a shy person is a person who really wants to go there and socialize and be part of, but doesn't find their way. And I don't think that's necessarily the case for 5s, although, there, to an extent, I can relate to that. But great talking to you, B, about this.
So that does it for us today. Thank you for listening, and join us again for our Enneagram 2.0 podcast, where we talk about all things Enneagram.